Great. So, welcome one and all. So, as I said, we have Dan and Florian with us this evening, and I was also reflecting at the start how much I absolutely adored Teresa's title for this session, Mindful Act of Rebellion. I think that's it, isn't it, Teresa? Something like that. And so, firstly, allow me to introduce Florian first, who's a consultant psychiatrist, CBT therapist, and lead of the mindfulness program at the Maudsley Hospital. And Dan, who used to work at the Bank of England, so and a background in public service, and now writes around themes of mindfulness, and is actually one of the authors of the recent Mindfulness Initiative publication around what's required in urgent times, and is also a mindfulness trainer. Can I ask you both, perhaps Dan first, would you like to say a few more words about your areas of interest and your background and context?
Cheers. Well, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. As Andrew mentioned, I worked in public sector economics for quite a while, about a decade. And about halfway through my time there, really, became interested in mindfulness through my personal practice. And I think maybe working in the field of economics, the mindset of economics is almost as opposite as you can get from being in the body, in the present moment, curious to just what is here before you. And so that kind of set me off interested in various things around mindfulness in the economic sense, which we might talk about, and more generally about mindfulness in society and the attention economy, which we'll talk about later. So the last few years, I've been working for a couple of NGOs, including the Mindfulness Initiative in this kind of area, and also do some mindfulness teaching in organizational context as well. So I'll leave it there. But yeah, fascinated in the topic and great to be here connecting, and great to see all of you. It's great that you've all got webcams on tonight. It's good to be here. Cheers.
Thanks, Dan. And Florian, would you be kind enough?
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, you introduced me well. I mean, all I wanted to add is I'm a psychiatrist who, across his career, has really been interested in emotions. So there's a lot of psychiatrists who are interested in psychosis and people with delusions, and I've always been much more interested in what we call anxiety disorders or affective disorders. And more recently, I've become more interested also in people with personality disorders, particularly around the borderline spectrum. I don't know if you've heard about this. There's often people who find it very difficult to regulate their emotions. So that's probably where my interest in mindfulness and my interest in sort of other forms of therapy, including schema therapy, are overlapping. Really thinking about what makes us tick as humans, what makes our emotions tick, and how can we learn how to become friendly with our emotions. I think that's probably the theme of my professional career. So yeah.
Thank you, Florian. And I think we owe Florian a bit of a debt for the fact that we're actually having this conversation, because this was partly born from your previous presentation in this space, and you're an established friend of the community when this subject of the attention economy really emerged, and there was so much interest among the community that we felt we really had to follow it up. So let's really get into it. So Dan, can you give us a bit of an explanation of what you mean by attentional economy or attention economy?
Sure. Yeah. So the attention economy, I think it's an expression that's kind of really came into prominence a few years ago, and I think it's very much related to the kind of modern digital environment that we're all very much, entwined within, integrated within in our modern lives. So as we know, we have, with these devices, connected devices, portable ones as well, we have more information at our fingertips than ever before, certainly than 12, 15 years ago. And of course, with that, as we all know as well, more distractions, more opportunities for distraction. And so, broadly, there's more things through this digital media environment, more competing things competing to grab our attention at any one moment. If you think of your feeds, social media feeds, your different apps that you use for news, and of course notifications, your messages, everything going on in our digital world is competing for our attention, is the basic idea. And so this phrase, the attention economy, I think really is just a way to make sense of this new world where we have, informational abundance, overabundance of information, that's for sure. And so our attention, what we, each of us, and collectively choose to pay attention to, then becomes, a very important question, and our attention becomes very valuable. So in terms of thinking about the attention economy, as an economist might, in terms of, demand for our attention, supply of our attention, very simply, the demand for our attention in this new world is, most approximately the different apps we use, social media, different news apps, everything else that we put our attention to. And of course, a little bit behind the scenes, there's also the advertisers who are ultimately the paying customers, if you like, of Twitter, of Facebook, of Google. They're paying money to have their adverts shown and get our eyeballs on the screen to see them. So that's the demand for our attention in this new digital or digitally mediated, let's say, world. And of course, the supply of attention is each of us every day. We have 24 hours, some of it sleeping, some of it's daydreaming, some of it's focused, some of it's distracted. We direct our attention in different ways. And I'm sure each of us here can relate to, probably a mixed scorecard in terms of how we're able to manage our attention. In other words, how disciplined are we, or successful are we in placing our attention on what we actually want to place our attention to, and not, for instance, clicking on a link and before we know it, 40 minutes has gone and we've been around lots of websites, YouTube, etc., etc. So I'll leave it there just to end on the point then that this is kind of this new world that we live in, and just to reflect a little bit further, if you look at the list of the biggest companies globally today, I think it's fair to say they're more dominated by any one industry than typically is the case. And that industry, of course, is tech. Big tech companies are really, really dominating the list of the top 10 or 12 companies globally. And of course, compared to previous decades, and I'm not an economic historian, but obviously have some background in economics, when you have finance companies, pharmaceutical companies, mining, energy companies as the biggest companies in the world, of course they have influence on our lives, but they're not integrated with our day-to-day lives in quite the same way that Google and Facebook and so on are. Very much integrated quite intimately with how we live. So it's just to reflect that, thinking about the global economy and who are the big players in the global economy. Well, it's big tech companies. They're intimately entwined with our day-to-day lives. I think that's fair to say. And our attention is really at the center of all of that. So there's a lot there and there's a lot going on, but there's been a lot of change in the last 10, 20 years around this. And I'll just end to say then that, attention from the economy's perspective, but also attention always for us individually could never be more valuable, more precious, more worth consideration, I think, than the situation we find ourselves in today.
Thanks, Dan. That's a rich introduction to the topic. And one of the things which I was going to ask, but I think you've answered it really, is around the societal and economic perspective. But what I got from what you just said is it's big, and it's really both on a macro level and on a personal level. It's so influential now.
It is, yeah. So and I think again, this will be familiar for everyone as to how social media, how our attention in the digital world plays out societally. I think we can all think of poignant examples. So in terms of how it matters economically, I think I've already kind of touched on that. I'll just add, the only thing I'll add to that is there's also this idea that our attention matters for all of us in our workplace, whether or not we work for Google or Twitter. In any job, typically, it helps to focus. I think most people relate to that. And so arguably, there's an angle where attention matters in the economy in terms of our productivity individually and for organizations and for the economy as a whole. Ultimately, if it's true that we're more distracted than ever, there's going to be a hit there to what you could call our mental capital, our human capital. But I think, really societally is where this gets more, really closer to home. And again, our politics is very different. We all know that. There's fake news, there's echo chambers, there's more polarization than it's certainly in my living lifetime. Today, I think we're more divided than ever I think, very materially because of the way that our social media platforms operate. And we can discuss that. That's contentious, and I'm certainly not anti-tech in the slightest, but I think the way that they're designed, I think, is problematic, and we can maybe touch on that later. But it also societally, you know, this idea of our attention being grabbed all the time, it's not just what we do when we're using our phones, but it's how it affects our relationships when we're not. And so Sherry Turkle, for example, professor at MIT, talks about, you know, just the presence of something which is kind of competing for our attention on the table between us. If we're catching up, me and you, Andrew, having a coffee, you know, if this is face up on the table, and even if it's not vibrating, that, you know, studies show affects the quality of our conversation. And I think there's something there to really think about.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. And one of the things which I used to, because I'm so virtually prehistoric, I remember before smartphones, and I used to say just about a phone that if you were talking to Teresa and I walked in with a bell and walked up to you, you would just look at me like I was completely mad. But if the phone went on your desk and you went and reached for it, that was perfectly normal. Sorry, I've got to get it. It's just fascinating. So on that note, Florian, you very kindly sort of described your interest in emotional regulation. So what, and emotions and how people manage them. What are the personal and emotional implications of this, this impact, this assault on our attention?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think Dan gave a very sort of lovely introduction to it, and a rather benevolent and a rather sort of soft introduction to it, because when we look at it closer, it is actually a bit more sinister than we thought it to be, because where we place our attention will be driving our emotions. And so when we think about how attention was grabbed in the past, you know, we all used to have billboards and say, oh, that's quite a nice, you know, sort of sparkly billboard, and that's interesting, I might buy that product. And then there was TV ads between, you know, during sports events, and we sort of saw the beer there, maybe wanted to and then have a beer. And that was sort of rather sort of controllable. So people have always been grasping for our attention to sell us products. So that's nothing new. What has changed is that people have noticed of how they can make us addicted to paying attention. So the big tech companies have noticed that they get our attention to basically triggering emotions in us. And that triggering emotions in us will cause an addiction to paying attention. So it's almost like we're sort of being made addicted. And I think that's a slightly more sort of slightly broader issue that has arisen out of this, because we're not in control of this. So, you know, we've got this lovely expression in the English language, I'm paying attention to something, which sounds like I'm taking out my wallet of attention and I'm just giving away my attention freely and with a choice. But what's happening nowadays is people are hacking into our wallet. So we're not even aware that we're giving away our attention dollar, as I like to call it, very freely to people who have got the most intricate way of getting to our attention. And I think so this is where it becomes slightly more political, in a sense that, you know, we are sort of as a species being, as you said, Andrew, we're being attacked by attention grabbers, but they're smarter than we are. And so we are not given a choice. We are being made addicted, and we are being, to some degree, I may say, manipulated in paying attention to the things that people have found out through intricate algorithms, what makes us addicted. So it goes beyond the economy, obviously trying to grab our attention. So that's the global economy trying to grab our attention. But what's our personal economy? How are we actually going to pull out our wallet to give away our attention dollar? And at the moment, we're at a stage in humanity for the first time, probably, where we're not giving a choice. We're just doing it. And I think that's where the rebellion theme comes in. And that's why I said, you know, maybe it's time to be aware of that and then sort of take our choice back.
And so how can mindfulness help us with that? I mean, feel we have to get mindfulness in there. It is a mindful workplace community after all. And is this a tool that can help us?
Handing over to you, Dan, or
Sure, yeah. I mean, of course, everyone here, I'm sure, has a mindfulness practice. Mindfulness, can be thought of very much as placing our attention on purpose to our experience moment to moment in an open way, in a curious way. So, the basic point, which I won't need to say, but it's so basic it is worth just saying, is that paying attention on purpose helps us to become intentional with our attention. And that's really kind of segueing from what Florian says, like at this time, I mean, there's always a challenge, I just say that, Aldous Huxley, among many others, Aldous Huxley, I think writing 100 years ago, talks about man's infinite appetite for distractions. And before that as well, there's obviously so many references. It's not new for the human psyche to be distractible, and to want to be somewhere other than where it is. But as Florian said, and as I've kind of sketched out, there's there are real challenges to be intentional with our attention in the current environment. So paying attention on purpose to the present experience is a great way to cultivate our ability to do exactly that, to pay attention intentionally. And what we get from that as well, apart from that basic ability to pay attention on purpose, is to just build our capacity to be responsive more than reactive. And again, I think for the group here, this may well be quite familiar ideas around mindfulness, but just to give an example, if again, thinking about the digital environment, if I go on Twitter, it's a very reactive space in my view. If you think about what's going on Twitter, you could give lots of different answers to that. It's a stream of opinions. It's I think Twitter describes it as like what's going on in the world. It's like on the one hand that's true, but there's a very specific thing, an environment, an atmosphere containing those opinions and streams of information, because of course it's very bite-sized. And again, the algorithms typically operate in a way, again, Florian might talk more about this, that trigger emotional reaction. Often, provocation works well. And again, so we're probably familiar with this, but if I think about, what's going on when I go on Twitter, when I go on social media, well, for one thing, there's a kind of currency of ideas there. What I mean by that is like, you just take it at face value that like someone's given an opinion, and then someone else there's a tirade of comments against it, and the whole space kind of revolves around this notion of opinion and information and who's right and who's wrong, and kind of there's a currency of ideas or currency of opinions. Either way, it's quite disembodied as a place to go to, and of course I use place metaphorically there, but I think there's interesting anecdotes, at least, that, and certainly people I speak to, that when I spend time on my phone, particularly when I'm quite absorbed in some content, this is a question we can each ask ourselves, what's going on with my sense of the body? So again, it's a currency of ideas, a currency of opinions. It's a very cerebral space in my view. And so mindfulness, the first thing I'd say, like I said, is to become intentional with our attention. And secondly, in becoming more responsive, less kind of autopilot, less reactive, one aspect of that, which I think is really important, is checking in with the body and noticing when I feel triggered, when I feel surprised, when I feel joyful, or whatever it is, checking in and noticing what's going on with me, with my body, as not in an individualistic way, but as a means to then understand what's going on a little bit more broadly with the medium in question, whether that's an interaction on Twitter or something else. There's more I'll say around a questioning approach, but I don't want to overshoot my time, so I'll leave it there for now. Maybe I can say more later if it comes up.
Yeah, Definitely, Dan, and I'm going to, as anybody who's been on one of these sessions before will know, I tend to completely abuse the fact that I'm in the chair and ask questions which I'm fascinated by. And there's something from what you said, Dan, that sounds really unhealthy. Yeah, it sounds really like an unhealthy world to be living in, where everybody's grabbing our attention, they're triggering us, they're triggering emotional responses in order to get us addicted, as Florian was saying. Is there evidence in your work, Florian, that you're seeing this having an impact? Are there studies to show the measurable impact of this on people's well-being?
Oh, totally. And this is what I'm saying, you know, the attention that we're giving, it doesn't come for free. We're paying a price for it. And the price is mental well-being. I mean, I want to only quote one study, which is the World Happiness Report. And you could go online and have a look at it. It's a fascinating document, and it shows basically the world is getting happier in general. That's the good news. But there's one country that is getting unhappier, significantly unhappier, and that country is the United States. And there's not entirely clear why that is, but there's a wonderful graph which I tend to show my fellow doctors, which basically shows is sort of teenagers were getting happier and happier until about 2007, 2008, and then it went down. And guess what happened 2007, 2008 is when the iPhone came out, and suddenly everybody was having this new tool that nobody had before. And teenagers started, you know, looking after their phones at nighttime, so they didn't sleep anymore, you know, normal uninterrupted sleep. And we now know that teenagers, for example, want to have body sort of plastic surgery, and teenaged years. Just to let that sink in for a moment. You know, we all could understand that at my age you want a bit of plastic surgery to look a bit younger. That's understandable. But at the age of 18 or 20 to have plastic surgery, now what's going on there? And what we know is there's a deep unhappiness among teenagers. They compare themselves, their image becomes relevant, they've got the whole world to compare themselves. Mothers become unhappy when they kind of compare themselves with their friends on Facebook. Using Facebook over, you know, a certain amount of time makes you unhappy. It drives your emotions down, because yet again we're in this, you know, world market of comparison and world markets of being grabbed by visual images of everybody else's beautiful lives. And so you know, I think we're paying a price for not looking of what's actually reaching our eyes. So well, yeah, so I just want to say that, you know, that yes, there is a lot of evidence.
Yeah, and when we were planning for this, we do plan these events, and we had a chat, and you shared something which really stayed with me, which was the idea that closing our eyes can be an act of rebellion. And I love that phrase, so I'm nicking it, sorry, but it is yours. I'm crediting it. But could you say a bit more about that? Because that sounds fascinating.
So this is something that we need to think very carefully. What if we think about us as a species? What makes us unique as a species in comparison to our cats, to our dogs? You know, what's the sense that we're best at? You know, and there's very clear that the sense that we're best at is our visual sense. You know, we're sticking out like light towers, you know, sort of like lighthouses. You know, we've got this wonderful, you know, intricate sense of being able to distinguish colors, very sophisticated visual sense. 30% of our brain power is being absorbed by our visual sense. Yeah. Unlike dogs that have got a very strong olfactory sense, much better than ours, or cats have got very good hearing. So a lot of what they do is actually through hearing. We are the visual species. Now, this sort of gives us a responsibility to look after that sense really well. And we you know, in the olden days when we were just roaming the savannah, we didn't have that much stimuli. You know, there was a tree there, and there was the mountain there, and then was a fellow human being with a club coming towards us, and then we thought, oh, who's that? Is it a friend or foe? So we didn't have a lot of things that should stimulate our eyes. And nowadays, it's just so much that's coming in. So the act of basically deciding I can close my eyes while I'm awake. Yeah, so normally we only close our eyes when we're falling asleep, but the act of closing our eyes while we're awake, and which we call meditation sometimes, or closing our eyes to meditate, actually is an act of real sort of, not rebellion, but perhaps an act of determination and choice. I'm controlling the stream of things that come into my brain through closing my eyes and sort of checking in with my other senses. So that probably is what the rebellion, the attention rebellion may be about, that we are actually starting to take control of that channel that is so accessible to these wonderful attention grabbers, that channel that's always open. We don't absorb, we don't eat every food that's being put in front of us indiscriminately just because it's there. We choose what we eat. We just don't necessarily choose what we look at. And can we sort of make our visual sense a sense that is more discerning? And the act of closing our eyes may be the first step.
Thank you. Dan, coming back to you, we've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, and it's I'm happy to say we've got more time to explore it further. But what does this mean for you in terms of our workplace, either as individuals or organizations? What's the implications of what we're talking about here?
I was just thinking about seeing and vision just from what Florian said, and I read something recently. It's David Hockney, the painter, and he's basically talking about you know, we're very focused with what we see and we don't really think about how we see. And he's basically, you know, an artist's sensibility to really look at something closely and to be still with something. And he's talking about, you know, like this ability of seeing in different ways and learning to see. And the philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, French philosopher who was very interested in seeing, also talked about, you know, the world is what we see, but we have to learn to see it, which can sound surprising because we assume we just see the world as it is. That's one way of looking at it, if you excuse the pun, but it's not the only way. But that's a digression. I mean, in terms of coming back centered on the workplace, I guess I just wanted to explore one idea really, which is around connection. So I guess really thinking about why this matters in the context of the current, you know, remote working environment that we're all in. What does it mean to connect with ourselves? There's a question there. And what I mean really is about day-to-day work-life boundaries. What am I doing? You know, like, I don't know about people on the call, but I know a lot of people, myself included, that, you know, in March and April made quite a lot of efforts to do various things with their daily routine, to have to break up the day and so on. And that can easily slip as we just, you know, get used to routines. So, you know, where are we at day to day? And in particular, like, how am I connecting with myself in terms of really like checking in with what matters, you know, what do I care about day to day? And that matters in a work context, of course. But then also connection interpersonally. And so what I found kind of guiding mindfulness practices in organizational context throughout lockdown is, you know, people, a Zoom meeting, as we're all probably here aware of, a Zoom meeting with an agenda and everything is a very specific thing. And of course, there's no easy way, I think, to recapture the other forms of workplace interaction that you might have, you know, when you walk past people at the coffee bar, when, you know, see people in the corridor, etc. It's hard to recreate that, but I think connecting through the practice of mindfulness with your eyes open or closed through Zoom is just a different way of coming together in the midst of a situation where we're forced to be not physically maybe in close proximity. So I think something around interpersonal connection through just being together as opposed to through having agendas for meetings, you know, it's just introducing a different energy to what a Zoom call, for instance, can be about.
Thank you, Dan. And Florian, same question to you. What does this mean, perhaps with a relationship to workplace well-being, but what does it mean for you about our workplace and for ourselves and as organizations?
I would agree. You know, it's time to actively look after our emotional well-being, because the default position is we'll be sitting in front of a screen. I mean, you know, we don't choose to sit in front of a screen. We just sit in front of screens, either as part of our online working or as part of, you know, us waking up in the morning and just looking at our screen. So I think it's about really sort of you know, as Dan said, sort of checking into other channels. And the channel of connection, and really is looking out for what actually nourishes my emotions, and looking, you know, being connected to other people is probably the most soothing sort of experience that we can have with regards to just soothing our emotions, nourishing our emotions. So when I talk to my junior doctors, I really sort of highlight to them, how can we look after our emotions like we're looking after our bodies? You know, can I make my emotions almost as precious as looking after my body through going to the gym, or eating nice food, or drinking less alcohol? How can I look after my emotions more actively? And obviously sort of looking after my connections, looking after my sort of affiliations with people is one thing. I mean, ultimately we can do an interpersonal connection, but often it's the intrapersonal connection that I think we can also really start nourishing, in a way that we're saying, hang on, what's happening with other senses other than my visual sense? My visual sense is absorbed by that screen. You know, that's the default position. The human condition is, I want to see things. That makes us human. Can we sort of connect interpersonally to other senses? What's happening in the body in this moment? What's actually happening in my smell? What's happening in my hearing? And sort of deliberately sort of checking in with the other senses, and in that way connect to ourselves in the present moment. And so in the workplace, indeed, I think if we're much more explicit about it, I think we are sort of, the elephant in the room is we're all looking at screens all day long. Now who's stopping us from doing that? Who's giving us an alternative to that? Who's saying to us, we're visual animals. We want to be stimulated all day long with our eyes. You know, this is the way we function, but it doesn't help our emotions. So maybe we need to be much more explicit about it and say, you know, this is happening. It's okay, but can we do something else?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I keep being reminded of an event which I went to, which was billed as a mindfulness conference, and I went along. There were other members of the community there actually. And there were 4 people talking, all from tech companies, on a podium, and they were all talking about how their systems worked and what they were trying to do, and it didn't feel very mindful, exactly as you'd been describing. And so I asked, is there any way that we can design tech to help support us in our mindfulness? And universally they said no. Now I have no idea if that's right or not. I have no idea, but it was just such a striking reaction. It was kind of like, and people were almost laughing at really, you want to do that? But it feeds exactly to everything that you've just said about how then do we take back our attention, and how do we nurture ourselves with the knowledge that you've just shared with us. So look, we're sorry, Florian, did you want to come back on that?
I may share, and I may have shared this before, and forgive me if I did. I have got a revolutionary sort of tech thing that they could actually change. And this is putting a little flashcard on the back of your mobile. So you turn away from the screen, you've got the screen in front of you, you're always looking at the screen, and then you turn it round. And then you suddenly see your flashcard saying, permission to stop, permission to breathe, feel the body, feel an area of calmness. So that we almost turn the thing around, and suddenly we get an invitation to not look at the screen. So maybe Apple could have that intricate flashcard module on the back of the screen. So maybe this is an sort of, maybe I should claim copyright on that, but this is sort of unexpected.
Everybody's going to be phoning up training standards now. Sinem, you want to ask something?
I'd like to say, is that all right to be saying something about this?
Yes, but we're about to break into groups.
Oh,
so
all right.
So what I was going to suggest is, if it's okay, what we're going to do now is break into groups, and I'm going to firstly, I'm going to thank Dan and Florian for a fantastic introduction to this this topic. Thank you so much. Yeah, a bit of a virtual round of applause there, I think. And what we're going to do is we're going to break into groups, and we're going to ask you 2 questions. Now, we discussed this earlier, and normally we have some quite structured questions, but this is such a broad topic. And I can already see people are commenting, and Cinema's got a question. And so I really want to leave it wide open. And I will invite you to be the first to ask a question, Cinema, when we come back. But to give us some form to the conversation. What we thought we could ask is, how does this translate for your organization or for you personally? So what does this mean for you or for your business or your organization? And then quite simply, what would you like to ask the panel, or what would you like to share? Because it may be, as I can already see, people have already got, somebody got in first ahead of me with the Netflix reference to The Social Dilemma, which I highly encourage everybody to watch. Utterly terrifying, but highly informative, and thank you. I think that was Sandra. So let's break into groups. Let's have that very general conversation about what we've heard. What does it mean for us? What does it mean for us personally and as and for our organization? And what would we like to bring back to the conversation? And we're going to have a shorter breakout session this time, maybe about 15 minutes, so that we can continue the conversation together. Is that okay? So what we thought we'd do with our remaining 25 minutes is have some questions and some discussion, really. And the way that we normally do this is to invite you to maybe put a question to Teresa in the chat, so that Teresa can curate them and pass them to me, so that we have a bit of a flow to them. We also thought, as we've been having such an active conversation, that if you wanted to raise your hand, I can just ask you to come in and speak as well. And we already have two comments which I wanted to pick up. So Sinan was very polite and very patient, so I'd really love you to ask your question first, and then Chris put something into the chat which I'd like to invite him to explain and explore a little bit further, and then we'll invite, as I say, further questions. So and one just thing before I do this, both Dan and Florian have very kindly said that we can contact them directly. So we will just mention how to do that. So when we run out of time, which we inevitably will, we can still continue the conversation. So thank you again for that. So Sinem, over to you.
You know, there is a list where mindfulness teachers can get listed, and there's an assessment criteria. How do you think that will support the mindfulness reach to masses? Because now there's some offerings here and there. I got an email from Inclo today about a mindfulness class. So what do you think the place of the assessment criteria and the list, and how can it be supported so that more integrity-based mindfulness reaches masses?
Thank you. Who wants to go with that one? It may not be something that I mean, I'm happy to share my thoughts, but do either of you have strong feelings about that, Dan or Florian? Dan, no?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. Mindfulness with integrity is key, because mindfulness without integrity is dangerous. Mindfulness without a value-based system and underpinning it is dangerous. So I would say, yes, we need to somehow expand the role of quality mindfulness. I wish we had almost like had a little bit of a seal that was open enough to include people from different backgrounds. Wouldn't exclude. I mean, I think the list we have at the moment is probably very psychology focused, which exclude a lot of people like yourselves who've come from different avenues. But on the other hand, we do need a seal of integrity for it, because otherwise it lends itself to causing potential harm.
Thanks, Florian. I should probably express an interest here I'm the co-director of Bamba, so that the UK sort of as close as we've got to an accrediting body, and so I'm very happy to share thoughts around that. But just to echo what Florian said, for me, it's the ethical application of mindfulness that is so important. And one of the risks with not having that is that it becomes tainted by people who aren't aware of what they're really doing, as well as the direct risks to people. So for all those reasons, I think it's a really important thing to enable it to get out to the masses. Yeah. So if that's okay for the moment, Sinem, but I'm very happy to pick that up. It's great. Chris, would you like to Thank you. Would you like to comment on the paragraph that you put into the chat, because it felt like there's a lot in there. You're on mute at the moment.
There we go. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose it's the idea of sort of trying to put the toothpaste back into the tube type concept, you know, it doesn't seem to me that that's a realistic proposition, and I think probably we may all agree on that. Just sort of one thought is, you know, how we approach things in our life. And Dan, you know, you were very interesting in talking about polarization, and I think there's something here about polarization towards the big tech companies as well. You know, this idea that they are, you know, these rather sinister organizations, which they may well be. I'm not suggesting that they're not. But I just wonder if we don't need to in a sense try and get out from this sort of political mess that we seem to have got ourselves into, where everyone is shouting and, you know, Facebook and all of these people are these terrible people and all that sort of stuff, and try and just bring things back to you know, to base level, and what, you know, how would that look like? What can we do to sort of do things maybe a little bit differently, and maybe that part of that is how we see things from our perspective at the moment, and maybe we need to slightly change our perspectives on things. I mean, you know, one of the areas I'm very interested in is like Florian is on training of professionals, and you know, it seems to me that you're very interested in medicine, I'm very interested in the law, but it's a very, very uncoordinated world where young lawyers, doctors come in, they're given no training as to the way the world goes round and all of those issues. They transition throughout a career into all sorts of different transitional periods. Finally, they retire and they go off. You know, it seems to me this is part of the failure of the educational system as it stands at the moment. We've got this, you know, imbalance between very sort of historic ways of teaching people on the one hand, and the world and technology is zooming off in another direction. And we are really struggling, I think, socially to try and catch up educationally, and creating a much more coordinated, thought through educational structures that allow young people to move into this new environment. Someone called it an obesogenic environment, you know, rather like sugary drinks make you fat. It's the equivalent of, this is a very obesogenic environment that we're now living in, and what can we do? And maybe just throwing stones at the social media guys isn't enough. We've actually got to accept that we are where we are, and we have to rethink the whole process of the way we educate and work and relate with each other.
Thanks, Chris. Let me put that to Florian first, and then I'll come to Dan. What do you? There's a lot there, Florian. What do you think?
I completely agree. There's no sort of devil behind the whole thing. There's no conspiracy going on. It's a new technology, like so many other technologies that we've been hit by. It's only for the first time, you know, well, you know, not perhaps the first time, but it is an addictive technology, and it's a technology that hacks into our emotions. So it's a very, very grand and unique technology that we're confronted with. And like so many technologies in the past, we had to somehow embrace them, love them. You know, we loved, you know, push bikes, and then eventually people noticed that you can fall off them and break your skull and die. So we had to wear helmets, and we loved locomotives, and we realized that they were causing a lot of toxic fumes, and we had to sort of restrict those. And cars. We loved them, and we had to learn how to put seatbelts in them, and sort of headrests and all the rest of it. So I think we're learning about this technology, and I think we need to start educating about the benefits of the technology, and then also about the risks of technology. So this is not a risk-free technology, and we need to sort of be aware of them, and perhaps we need to restrict them like we did with Instagram and self-harm images and all these kind of things. So yes, we're in there, and I think what we're doing here today is probably part of that. We need to look at the side effects of these technologies and see how we can sort of rein it in a little bit. And mindfulness may be one way of doing this, is I think it's giving people choices. And once this takes a tipping point, there's no reason why people should not suddenly start meditating in order to balance that on a mass basis, like people went to the gyms in the masses in the 80s, and people went to, I don't know, go into keto diets, the last 2 years or something like that. Suddenly there might be a tipping point where people just recognize we need to do something.
Thank you, Florian. Dan, do you want to comment on that? You're on mute at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chris, for that, and thanks, Florian, for that comment as well. I'm with you, Chris, and I think if it's fair to say, this issue that we're in right now, societally across the world, in terms of polarization, is just I can't get my head around how big it is, and I can't understate how much I think this is, like you said, an educational challenge in the face of this new technologies that are really, really game changers. And so I think something which mindfulness and other contemplative practices, I think, really offers in this context of polarization is, and it was in Florian's breathing space that he just led us through. He asked us the question, what's going on? What's going on in your experience, of course, but there's a particular type of questioning, a particular type of curiosity, which is integral to mindfulness practice and other practices, which is just asking, what is this? Like, what's going on here? What is this? And asking that again and again. And so I think just keeping asking that question. So, for example, with polarization, I'm going to read a quote from Jaron Lanier, who some of you may have come across, but let me read this quote from him. He says, personally, Trump supporters seem nuts to me, and they say liberals seem nuts to them. But it's wrong to say that we've grown apart and can't understand each other. What's really going on is that we see less than ever before of what others are seeing. So we have less opportunity to understand each other. So in other words, if we notice polarization, which is a fact on social media and in our societies, you could say pulling our social fabric apart, we notice that's what's going on. That's a fact, I think. But to look at it at that level of just people are very opposed and they can't get on anymore, that's true. But for me, it's because that we can't see the world in a shared way, that increasingly it's difficult to have what I would call common ground, or to have shared experience, which has always been the bedrock, I think, of, it's something with mindfulness practice. We're all here together just sharing something, and it may not be said, it may not be stated, but we have some shared experience. So what Lani is getting to there is, yes, we're really polarized, but look deeply at what's causing that. And I think it is the fact that, every one of us, and again, I'm not actually anti-social media necessarily per se, but the way that these technologies have evolved is that it's very individualized in terms of, we all see something different in terms of our news feeds and so on. So to ask the question, okay, what's going on with that? What's going on that something on the news, if you are of one political persuasion, you will see a completely different Twitter feed to someone else who's of a different political persuasion. The fact that we're not seeing the same things, even before you get into fake news and everything, just the fact that we're seeing such different filters on the same things. And of course, this is a relative point. This has always been the case, depending who you talk to, what newspaper you read, etc. But that individualization of our news feeds, and what that does to what I would call common ground, what that does to our shared experience, this is, for me, the biggest thing, the biggest thing. and it's an educational challenge, and I think it's a huge one. And again, personally, I'm trying, although most of what I've said this evening fits into this kind of bashing the big tech companies, and I think they're not working for us. I stand by the view that, you know, Facebook says we bring people together, yes, but also no. Like, look at what's going on, you know. But I just want to say, you know, there's so much going on, and I've probably presented an overly simplistic big tech is bad narrative here, which is actually not my view. But like I said, because of what Chris has mentioned, because of this thing about polarization and shared experience, there's a huge problem here, and it has to be addressed by everyone, governments, all of us.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Thank you. So we've got some other questions coming up. So one from Martin. Martin, you've asked particularly around good resources. Do you want to ask a question around resources? Martin, where are you? I can't see. Yeah. Great.
So I do, I suppose some of my work within mindfulness is around attention and safety and so on. I've come across a really good book by Carol Newport called Deep Work, and some really good research. Someone called Levy, 2012, looking at the effect of mindfulness, allowing attention to be more under control, you know, less distracted. I just wondered if there's other resources out there, writers, you know, articles, books you could recommend.
So maybe a quick thought on that, and then maybe we could get together a little bit of a list of your top 5 or top 10 favorite authors on the subject, Florian and Dan, and maybe we can disseminate that to the community. Would that be a plan?
Definitely, yeah. I've got a couple here I can share.
Yeah, go for it.
So this is Matthew. This is actually a while ago. I mean, I don't know where it's published, but social media was around, but smartphones weren't that embedded as they are now. I mean, it's probably 6 years or so, I think. Anyway, The World Beyond Your Head by Matthew Crawford, I think is very good. And more recently, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell, who's an artist by training. Brings some, it's actually, this is particularly recommend this for this group because she doesn't mention mindfulness once. But, you know, I mentioned David Hockney earlier, and, you know, so she's coming to attention from a particular perspective, which has fascinating insight and great parallels with a mindfulness-based perspective on the topic.
Thank you. Have we lost Florian? I think Florian. Oh no, Florian just switched off your camera. I don't know if there's any particular authors that you'd like to recommend, Florian, if you can hear us.
I'm not sure Florian can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's carry on with the next question, which is, and then hopefully Florian can come back. But what would be great is if we can compile a little bit of a list of authors on the subject.
I'm here. Apologise. I just wanted to grab that book.
Oh, no problem. Go for it.
Yeah. So it's hopefully you've all read it. If you haven't, then go out and read it again, and then read it again. It doesn't talk about mindfulness, but it gives you a different picture of the world, and in my opinion, a much more evidence-based picture of the world. And you know, I think we need to be always looking at the way the things are. You know, if we think about, you know, mindfulness, paying attention to what's going on in the present moment without judgment, to the way things are, and the way things are is often determined by best science. And Stephen Pinker is just outlining it to us, you know, what that is currently with all the issues that drive us, that worry us, that make us anxious. So this is a very good book that I would just say that, you know, read it. Read it again.
Thanks, Florian. That's great. So I think we're probably going to have time for one, maybe two more questions. But Amanda, you put in the chat regarding, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, so indistractable. Do you want to explore that a bit, Amanda?
Yeah, I'll do my best. Hopefully there's not too much background noise. So this is not an academic book, but a guy studying behavioral psychology and specifically looking at attention and solutions for this very distracted world. And he has a nice model which essentially posits distraction as the opposite of traction, and talks about how we can create traction on the things that matter to us and avoid all of this tech nonsense that's distracting us. His philosophy or point of view specifically is that we need to use technology to our advantage in the sort of realist understanding that like social media technology is not going anywhere, so our only real option is to look at how to make it work for us and to take command of it. So building in, using psychology, understanding how to prompt positive behaviors, you know, like we have this stuff already, it's not like a new idea, but all of like the web blockers and the things that kind of restrict your access to certain technology and invite you to take breaks and really kind of use technology to, as Florian said, educate us on what's needed. But I don't know, that doesn't feel that mindful, because even like I use Calm, the app, and Headspace and all the other apps, and there's something still not quite as wonderful as just sort of sitting in a forest somewhere without your phone. So I wondered what your thoughts on this idea of technology fighting technology is.
Great, thank you, Amanda. Dan, do you want to go first on that?
I'd love to. Yeah, that's a really brilliant question, and it's something that I think about quite a lot. So for me, it's always, I think it has to be both, but I think it has to be both and not just the technological solution. So I think it's absolutely goes without saying that, you know, technology per se is not, I don't think is the problem, as in technology in terms of our affordances through these innovations per se is not the problem. It's how they're designed and how we use them. And on the same track, you know, as Niraya was saying in that book, we can definitely design technologies a lot better. And of course, Tristan Harris and others are doing similar things there. But I'll say why I think someone who says we can solve this problem with tech, a kind of problem solved kind of statement, why I find that problematic. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier about, for me, a core quality of mindfulness is this open-ended questioning. And open-ended questioning is, you know, what is this to our experience? There's an inherent mystery to being with the breath, to what it is to see another. There's an inherent mystery in my view to what it is to be human at some level. And so for me, the risk is if you seek to solve the problem through, you know, technological means, it's fueling a certain mindset, which I see is very prevalent across Silicon Valley, which is a kind of what I would call a solutionist mindset. So I think Eugenie Morozov back in 2013 came up with that term, and he came up with the term because, you know, if you're in Silicon Valley, you are invited to see things in terms of data flows. Yuval Noah Harari calls it dataism. You know, this idea that there's data out there and we need to solve problems, and if we're smart enough, we can solve them if we configure the right things. Basically, that's fine, except that if that's your whole view of life, of, you know, what's before you, what's possible, then it's a very limiting view, because it's basically very reductionist, as I think we can appreciate, and it leads to this mindset of optimizing, which again has its place in the world. As a former economist, you know, I had to do a fair bit of it. But I think I struggle with people who say, oh, there's a technological solution for a problem like this, which I think goes quite deep to what it is. You know, for me, attention isn't something just instrumental that we place here or there, and we need to optimize how we place it. It can help to think a bit in those terms, but when we pay attention, I think there's something, personally, I would say something sacred with being present with one's experience, and much more besides that. That says to me, we need to think about, you know, what is our philosophy of life? What does it mean to be human first? And then look at where technology and its solutions fits into this particular problem, rather than assume that technology can provide all the solutions. That would be my kind of approach to that. But I find it fascinating.
Thanks, Dan. Florian, would you like to come back on that?
I think, Dan, you've made a very, very good case. And technology almost sounds like always a bit, is there a quicker way to something? Is there a faster way to something? And is there a more elegant, perhaps a less painful way to something? Is there just a more convenient way to something? And that's often what we use technology for. And as much as I'm a big fan of perhaps high intensity exercise, you know, doing 30 minutes in the gym rather than 4 hours, you know, I'm a big fan of, you know, nice diets that keep your weight low. I would say ultimately with mindfulness, there is no quick fix and there's no fast track. Because mindfulness is so much larger than just attention placement, attention rebellion, whatever we want to call it. It's ultimately about what Dan said. It's about what does it mean to be human? How can we be at ease with being with other human beings, or what we call compassion? And, you know, there is no mindful awareness without compassion. There is no being with other humans without compassion. And there's no being with ourselves without compassion. And for compassion, there is no app. I'm afraid there is ultimately no technology that will just get us faster into it. And so I'd like to sometimes say, can we sort of go the romantic way of doing things slowly and giving ourselves the permission to basically stop and say, well, maybe I just need to sort of sit with myself and sit with developing that compassion over a long period of time and developing that practice. So I wish I had the technology, and if anybody of you finds it, then let me know, but I suspect there isn't, because being human is just something we need to perhaps just be slow about.
Thank you so much, Florian. Well, time has indeed beaten us, but what a fantastic way to spend an hour and a half. Thank you so much, Dan and Florian. It's just been great. And thank you, as always, to the whole community for your input and your questions. We were actually talking about how much scope there is for this and whether we could have a day-long workshop. So watch this space. If there's an appetite for it, then do let us know, because we're keen. And just thank you so much for all your time, as always. It's been absolutely great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. See you soon.
Pleasure.
Take
Thank
care.
you so much.
Bye.